Alcatraz, one of the most famous prisons in the world. A small island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. A bare rock topped by an impregnable fortress. The prison operated for 29 years. And during all that time, it held gangsters, murderers, and kidnappers. The most dangerous criminals in America were sent here with no hope for rehabilitation like in other, more lenient prisons. It was believed that escaping from here was impossible. But, of course, people still tried to do it. On the afternoon of April 27, 1936, Joseph Bauer, inmate number 210, was throwing trash into the incinerator in the prison yard. Suddenly, he dropped the wheelbarrow he was pushing and ran toward the fence, ignoring the guard's shouts. He even managed to climb over the fence, and then a gunshot rang out. Inmate number 210 fell off a cliff, dropping 50 feet, and he died on impact. In a way, he got what he wanted. He died outside the prison walls. This was the first documented escape attempt from Alcatraz. There would be a total of 14, and all but one would fail. Alcatraz Island is located about 2 kilometers off the coast of California, right in San Francisco Bay, just past the famous Golden Gate Bridge. 2 kilometers sounds like nothing. You can see the city from every side. The shore is close by. It seems like you could just jump in the water and swim for it. But that's a misleading impression. The water in San Francisco Bay is icy cold and the current is strong, pulling you straight out into the open ocean. Sometimes the bay is covered in such thick fog that you can't even see your own hand, let alone the shore. The island itself is very small, about 500-something meters long and 180 meters wide. In the center, at the top, is the prison itself, a huge box made of thick concrete with a single entrance. Around the perimeter, there's a fence topped with barbed wire and guard towers. The guards have orders to shoot to kill. Beyond the fence, there's a steep drop-off. In some places, it's about 6 meters, in others as much as 15. Sometimes there were as many as 3 guards for every inmate. Ordinary prisoners didn't end up in Alcatraz. Only those who had completely worn out the patience of the authorities at other prisons were sent here. Psychopaths, sadists, troublemakers, and inmates prone to escape attempts. In American prisons, sinister rumors about the island spread very quickly. Everyone knew what went on in Alcatraz. Beatings, torture, forcing inmates to sleep on the cold floor, and so on. The cells were damp, windowless, and there was nowhere to hide. Instead of doors, there were thick bars. Many people lost their minds. There are known cases where people chopped off their own fingers with an axe just to avoid working in the prison workshops. Suicide was a common occurrence. The prison administration admitted that the very existence of Alcatraz had a huge deterrent effect. Among criminals, it was simply called the Rock. Follow the rules or you'll end up on the Rock. That was an effective threat. And on the island, the local solitary confinement cell, better known as the Hole, had a particularly terrifying reputation. Dark stone cells where there wasn't even any furniture. Prisoners were put in there naked. But what's funny is that there were also criminals who actually asked to be sent to Alcatraz. These were the ones who loved to eat and suffered from bad prison food. Everyone knew that. For some reason, Alcatraz had the best prison food in America. Of course, even in Alcatraz, there were people who enjoyed special treatment from the administration. For example, someone served his own 11-year sentence here, the legendary Al Capone. His cell was just like everyone else's, damp with no windows. But he was brought good furniture, a bed, an armchair, and even a desk. He played banjo in the prison band and achieved great success in music. Besides Capone, many other stars of the criminal world did time in Alcatraz. For example, another gangster legend, Mickey Cohen, the king of the Los Angeles nightlife. He also served a sentence here. George Machine Gun Kelly, an old-school gangster. And the infamous hitman, cop killer, and kidnapper. He got his nickname for his masterful handling of the Thompson submachine gun. There were also dozens of other criminals who were just as famous and just as ruthless. Mobsters, bandits, bank robbers, killers, bootleggers, and so on. Up to 300 people were held in Alcatraz at the same time. There were arguments, fights, and murders. The guards were brutal. And despite all that, escape was considered impossible, and there were no successful escapes. People still tried to break out. Almost everything you've seen in movies about prison breaks was first tried by inmates in Alcatraz. In 1937, two inmates, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, realized that the security in the prison workshops was weaker than in the main building. They escaped from the workshops by simply sawing through the bars with stolen files and climbing out the window. They had tires to cushion their jump from the cliff and canisters to help them stay afloat in the water. There was thick fog, so the guards in the towers didn't see them. But the water temperature that day was only 11 degrees Celsius. The fog that made it hard for the guards also made it hard for the escapees. They had no idea which way to swim. Their bodies were never found. For a while, they were on the most wanted criminals list, but they are officially considered dead. The workshops, naturally, after that, they were rebuilt. In another case, 3 inmates decided to take a more radical approach and attacked the guards. They beat one guard to death with a crowbar, took his weapon, but didn't realize there were still several hundred armed people on the island. 2 of the escapees were shot and the 3rd surrendered. In 1939, the notorious gangster Arthur Doc Barker and 4 of his friends sawed through the bars of their cells. It turned out that the bars hadn't been replaced since the days of the military prison, and they were made of soft steel. They broke the outer bars using a homemade jack. The escapees managed to reach the shore, where they started building a raft. But while they were wandering by the water looking for wood, a guard spotted them from a tower and opened fire. The guard's name was Mirov, and after that, they ordered new bars made of hardened steel. In 1941, a prisoner hid in a trash container and managed to reach the shore. Everything seemed to be going well. The escapee ended up in the water. He started swimming, but after a few minutes realized he was freezing to death. He barely managed to swim back and surrendered to the guards. In 1943, prisoners attacked 2 guards and tied them up. While the criminals were breaking the bars, the tied-up guards managed to raise the alarm. One crawled over to the other and blew the whistle that was hanging around his colleague's neck. The guards opened fire on the escapees, who were already in the water, holding on to stolen barrels. One of the survivors managed to hide in a cave on the shore. He stayed there for 2 days, and then, starving, climbed back into the prison through the same window he had escaped from. During the war, the prison workshops sewed uniforms for the American Army. In 1945, one of the inmates managed to steal a full set of an Army sergeant's uniform. Whistling and strolling casually, he walked to the ferry heading to the mainland and boarded it. When everyone disembarked from the ferry, of course, their documents were checked, and the fake sergeant didn't have any. Escapees drowned, got shot, broke their limbs, tried to build rafts, and even sew together primitive wetsuits. They went to all sorts of lengths. But the most cinematic escape happened on May 2nd, 1946. It's known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Several people took part in the escape attempt. The most dangerous among them were Bernard Coy and Joseph Kretzer. Both were seasoned gangsters. Coy was serving 25 years for bank robbery, and Kretzer was actually listed by the FBI as public enemy number 1. Coy spent a long time studying the patrol routes until he literally knew them. He also noticed that the gallery patrolled by the armed guard was separated from the inmates by nothing but a metal grate, and the gaps between the bars were pretty wide. On the day they escaped, there were 2 guards in the block. One was unarmed, the other was armed. The unarmed guard was distracted and strangled, while the armed guard was at another point along his route. When he came back, Coy was waiting for him. Coy had starved himself for several months so he could squeeze through the bars. He got a set of keys, a rifle, and a pistol. With this gear, Coy and his friends disarmed several more guards and freed about a dozen neighbors. But after learning about the escape plan, many of them went back to their cells. The plan was simple: fight their way to the boats. But it failed right away. While trying to pick the locks, the gangsters used the wrong key and jammed the lock. No one had raised the alarm yet, but just then, a new shift of guards entered the block that had been taken over. They were immediately held at gunpoint and disarmed. Now, the rioters had 8 hostages and a decent amount of weapons. The battle for Alcatraz lasted 2 days. The inmates fought back fiercely. They had no intention of surrendering. On the second day, the prison authorities called in the military, and Marines who had recently fought on Okinawa landed on the island. They didn't hesitate to throw grenades into the prison. 5 people were killed, 14 wounded. 2 of the survivors were executed in the gas chamber, and the third received a second life sentence. After that, security measures were seriously tightened, and nothing like that ever happened again. Until the legendary and still mysterious escape of the 1960s. Year. This escape is known as the Anglin brothers' escape. There were 4 participants in total. Brothers John and Clarence Anglin, Frank Morris, and Alan West. It's worth noting that none of them ever killed anyone. Morris dealt drugs and committed robberies. The Anglins were into burglaries and car theft. West was also in for car theft. The plan was devised by Morris. He noticed that behind the concrete walls of the cells were old ventilation shafts, and the concrete itself wasn't all that strong. Using a spoon, a melted coin, and a vacuum cleaner motor, the inmates built a drill. They spent a year drilling through the wall. They could only work for about an hour a day when music was played over the prison loudspeakers. They disguised the holes of plugs made from a mixture of newspapers, water, and glue. West and Morris traded with other inmates for rubberized raincoats and jackets, which they used to sew a raft. They made dummy bodies and painted copies of their own heads out of papier-mâché. These heads had real hair, stolen from the prison barber shop. On the night of June 11th to 12th, 1962, the most famous escape in Alcatraz history began. It covered the fake bodies with blankets and placed the dummy heads on the pillows. The Anglin brothers and Morris crawled into the tunnel. West didn't go in. Whether he didn't make it in time or lost his nerve, it's thanks to him that we know the details of the escape. The ventilation tunnel was very narrow, only about 1 meter wide. They first had to climb up it for 10 meters, get out onto the roof, and then go down a pipe. The 3 escapees made it to the water, inflated their rubber raft using bellows from an accordion they had stolen from the prison hobby club, and set off. No one ever saw them again. According to the official version, they died at sea. A wallet wrapped in plastic was found on the shore. Inside were addresses, last names, and photos of the Anglin brothers' recruiters. They also found a homemade life vest with a broken valve and scraps of rubberized material. The FBI concluded that all 3 drowned. But is that really what happened? In 2011, the National Geographic Channel reported that there was another FBI report that had recently been declassified. According to it, what is the conclusion? It turns out the raft was actually found hidden in the bushes near the shore, and there were tracks leading away from it. It's also known that on June 13th, 1962, near San Francisco Bay, 3 unidentified men stopped a car, threw the driver out, and drove off. After the escape, someone started regularly sending flowers to England's mother, and later postcards from South America. In 1973, when she died, 2 strange women were seen at the funeral who looked like men in disguise. In 2013, the FBI received a letter supposedly from John Anglin. He wrote that he was sick with cancer and wanted to come back, offering a deal. A year in prison in exchange for treatment. The letter was acknowledged. As a fake, in 2020, the Irish Business Post reported that a facial recognition system had identified, in a 1975 photo from Brazil, 2 men who, with 97% certainty, are John and Clarence Anglin. Alcatraz prison was closed in 1963, a year after that escape. It turned out to be too expensive to maintain. The buildings quickly deteriorated from the wind and seawater. Since 1983, a triathlon has been held every year in the area around the island. It's called Escape from Alcatraz. Participants have to swim 2.5 kilometers from the island to the shore. Then they have to bike 29 kilometers and run 13 kilometers. Every year, someone manages to do it. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. There are plenty more interesting videos coming up.